Hello, Gems! Welcome to another episode of Tiaras and Tech. I'm your host, Shelley Benhoff, and today I'm talking to Deborah Kurata about lessons she has learned in technical management. She is a Pluralsight author, speaker, Microsoft MVP, and Google GDE. We talked about our struggles moving from dev to management and some of the tips that she learned along the way. I have learned so much from her, and I'm honored that she fit this chat with me into her very busy schedule. Without further ado, on to the episode. And we're live, so I want to welcome you, Deborah. Thank you so much for joining me here, and I wanted to start by having you just introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you're from, and what your career experience is.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you having me on. So my name is Deborah Kurata. I am a software developer and a Pluralsight author. I primarily author courses on C# and Angular. So I have quite a few courses in both categories or both areas on the Pluralsight site. I am originally from Wisconsin, and so, if you're familiar with anyone from the Midwest, you might catch some of that in my tones. I spent a little bit of time in Virginia and then moved out to California. I'm currently in the San Francisco Bay, Silicon Valley area, which made it really nice back in the day when we could go places to be so close to clients both in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco. But now it doesn't matter where we are, I guess.
Very true. Yeah. So with all of your experience with Angular and C# and all of that, and I just want to mention that I've watched a number of your courses and I've learned a lot, not only technically, but also your overall style, your presentation. Like, I've studied what you do. So thank you so much for that. But today's topic is on management and lessons learned. I think that we both have stories on this topic. So I just wanted to start off by kind of asking, how did you move from development to management?
Well, I actually, backing it up even a little bit further than that, I actually have degrees in math and in physics. So I didn't have any management background in college, nor computer science for that matter. I did work in the computer lab, and so after I graduated, I went to graduate school for a year, ran out of money, and used my job in the computer lab to get me a job in tech. And from there, I asked zillions of questions. That's pretty much what I did all day for, I think, the first year that I worked. What's this? Why is that? Why, what does this mean? Why this? Why that? Lots and lots and lots of questions. And it really helped me understand not only the particular product that I was working on, but what other people were working on. I was, if I asked somebody a question and I didn't understand the answer, I would go ask somebody else the same question and somebody else the same question until I finally found someone who explained it in the words that actually made sense to me. So I got to know a lot of the people in the organization besides my little group. And so as the projects continued to grow, I started to take on more project lead responsibilities. And then when the company moved to Virginia, I got a management role at the company, even though I really had no real management expertise or background. So after a couple of years of leading the team there and being a little frustrated with not feeling like I knew what I was doing, I decided, well, since I'm in Williamsburg, Virginia, I might as well go to William and Mary. So I went to the College of William and Mary part-time. I worked full-time, and I got an MBA. And that was quite helpful in a lot of ways. But I think that, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about some of this soon, but a lot of the things that it seemed like the instructors teach aren't necessarily how the real world works. It seems that, a lot of the teachers faculty are full-time faculty, and they're not working with, especially not people in tech. And so a lot of the principles that they taught didn't quite match with what I was seeing in the industry. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on. But that was kind of my path.
Yeah, almost the exact same thing happened to me. I got into management with no management experience. I think in college, I took one class and I got a C, and that was my only C that I got. I was a straight A, perfectionist type person. But yeah, when I started in management, I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have support from the boss that I worked for. I still had to do my old job on top of being the manager. So that didn't really set me up for too much success. I was just wondering, what did you struggle with to learn, like, management practices?
Well, a lot of trial and error, a lot of error. So that made it difficult for the people I worked with, I'm sure, because I tried different things to try to, figure out how to make it work. One of the things that I tried early on, because like just because you're in charge of the team doesn't mean you don't also still have your work to do.
That's right.
So one of the things that I tried, just because I wasn't getting my work done, is doing closed door hours, so that certain hours during the day, the door would be closed. So I was trying like 2 hours every afternoon to just not talk to anyone. And that was just not a very good idea.
Yeah.
Because somebody would run into a problem, nobody was there to answer their questions. So they either would go down the wrong path or sit and read the newspaper for 2 hours waiting for me to finish, or, whatever. Yeah, it tells you how long ago that was. They were reading the newspaper and not surfing the web. So I think that, as I said, there was a lot of trial and error. And one of the things that I learned in business school was that you needed to figure out what your management style is.
Absolutely.
Do you want to be a Lee Iacocca? Do you want to be a Ross Perot? Do you want to be a Bill Gates? Do you want to be Steve Jobs? What is your management style? And it took me a really long time to realize, I think probably 20 plus years to realize that that is wrong. That is just completely wrong, because management isn't about you. I don't mean you particularly, but you, the manager. It's not about me. It's not about what I want or the way I want to manage. A good manager makes it about them. What does that person need? And it was interesting. I just, a little story. I like to watch a TV show called The Rookie. Have you ever seen it?
I haven't, but that one has been on my list for a long time. Yeah.
It's Nathan Fillion, and I am just a huge Nathan Fillion fan.
Oh,
and
same.
It's very good. It's one of the first police shows that I thought I don't know that much about policing, but seemed more accurate. Once they have a shooting, then the person is on desk duty for a while, not after the guy who, whatever, all that stuff. That's so obviously not how standard procedures would be. But anyway, they recently had an episode that just kind of spoke to this management style thing. One of the rookies finished their rookiness and had been promoted to a full-time officer, and was meeting with the person who was going to be having the same training officer as her, and telling her how incredibly difficult it was, and how he had treated her. And it went on and on and on about what the experience was like. And then over the course of this episode, she started seeing him treat her completely different. And she got so upset, why were you so difficult or so hard on me, where you're so friendly with this person?
Mm-hmm.
And the guy basically said, well, you came in with this everything is roses kind of attitude, and I needed to show you how hard and how difficult it is out there.
Wow.
This other person that came in was what do you call them? A vet from Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
So I needed to teach them that those aren't your enemy out there, that those are good people, and you can't just, immediately be thinking that they're out there to, their whole goal is to be, attacking you. And so because each person needed something entirely different, he completely changed his style of training them to match.
And I think person.
And I think that's really important to be thinking about when you're managing people. One person might be coming in with very little technical skills, but a huge drive and wants to learn, and you spend time different with them than another person who comes in with all the experience, but maybe not good communication skills, or someone else that comes in that's good at communicating and good at technical skills, but isn't very good at working with others. So you want to, manage them as they need to be managed, not what your management style is, because it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be about you.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that speaks to, I'm a servant leader, like nobody works for me. Like I work for them, they do the work that I want. And so to ensure success, I support instead of, I'm on high and I'm like, a queen or something. And I have my subjects. That's interestingly not how I manage people, even though that's how I look. But yeah, it's important to take the person's, personality, needs, goals, and cultivate a relationship through mentoring, which is something that I didn't really start until later on. Like when I started as a manager, I didn't mentor people as well. So I wasn't a very effective manager. I was just wondering, what is your mentoring experience?
Well, at least from what I can recall, the whole mentor concept wasn't really a thing back when I started. I mean, I'm significantly older than you, so there's significantly more years back there, but it just doesn't seem like people talked about mentors. People had mentors, and I don't know if it's because we didn't have like social media, we didn't have ways of communicating like that. Back when I first started, nobody talked about having a mentor really, at least not to the extent that everyone does now. And so it wasn't something that I really knew of. It wasn't something that I'd ever really formally experienced. My first two jobs, interestingly, both in the computer lab and my first job in industry, in both cases, my manager was a woman, which is not the case anymore. I think we have lost the percent of women going into software has decreased since the time I started, because there were a lot more women doing programming back then. A lot more women at the company I worked for. And as I said, my boss was a woman. One of the other big areas of the companies that was run by a woman. And so I sort of felt in some respects, I had some amount of mentoring because I had someone who was willing to answer my questions. And I had zillions of them, why do you declare variables? I mean, everything from those little tiny details. Why was this handled this way instead of doing it that way? What is the naming conventions that we should be using? Why on everything. So in that respect, both of them were probably informally a mentor without ever really defining a mentoring relationship. I find now that, or at least over the past several years, the term has become different things to different people. I know several people over time have asked me to mentor them, which really, I think, from them explaining what they were looking for, they really wanted someone to help them get into a big company. And I, have limited ability to do that because I don't work at Google. But they see I'm a GDE, a Google developer expert, and they assume I can get them into Google. And so I have not taken those kind of people on to mentor, because if that's what their goal is, for me to help them get into Google, I won't be the one to get them through that path. So I do think that it's important to spend time. I mean, one of the things that's so easy to do is kind of the grass is greener on the other side, that you focus not on what you have, but what you could have. Like one of the projects that I worked on a while back, if we only had an expert in XYZ, we could do this so much easier, instead of, okay, we need to learn XYZ. How can we as a team get better to do that? And so I think it's important to look at not just what your team members know, but what they could know. There are always there's always a couple people on your team that are like the early adopters, that are the ones that are the first to, .NET just came out with a new blah, blah, blah. And so let's try that out in our application. Let's try out generics. Let's try out, whatever that the technology is. And then there are others that are like, I've learned how to do it this way, and I'm not very comfortable with changing to a different approach. And, again, so it kind of goes into managing each person how they need. And when you do need to be moving into, a new product or whatever, that it's those ones that are early adopters as the ones that you want to help kind of move your team in that direction, and have them do lunch meetings where they're presenting little topics of fun things you could do and why you would want to do those things, and how it helps the team and how it would help your end customer, and those kinds of things. And, kind of mentor the people that you have, instead of always looking, if we just had someone else, if we just had an expert on this, if we just had someone who could write the documentation for us, if we just had, instead, if you really focus on what you have and how you could mentor and help to, make your team what you need your team to be, and bring out each person's strengths.
Right. Yeah. I think one one point that you made was that so many teams and companies don't invest enough time in training their existing employees on new skills. Oop, I just hit my microphone. But yeah, and with Pluralsight recently, I feel like we were talking about this, and the problem currently is that teams are underskilled. So like it's even more important now with all of these expanding technologies. I mean, technology has exploded in the past 2 years because of Corona. But yeah, I don't really know where I was going with that, but that was just a thought that I had. Yeah, for training to per- provide your team with training time. I've only had one job that ever did that for me. And it was weird because I was also a Pluralsight author on the side. So I'm like watching courses for free because I'm an author. So I get access to all the courses for free. But yeah, it helps a lot to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and when you're mentoring too, I think it's really important to focus on guiding and not necessarily criticizing.
Mhm.
So often now code reviews are just done on GitHub, and it's easy to just, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that, you should have done this, you should have done that. And that's not necessarily always helpful. Sometimes you want to provide more guidance. Like I've had people send me feedback on my Pluralsight courses, like, your voice makes me sick. It's like, well, that is not providing me anything actionable,
Exactly.
other than to maybe suggest that you can turn my voice off and turn on the captioning and read it yourself.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, or, you sound like a robot
I
or
was just going to
whatever.
say, yeah, we've had a lot of conversations about this because we've both had this comment multiple times, and it's just kind of like, well, all computers have women's voices now, so what are we going to do? Like our voices are not computer generated. We read, into a microphone, and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I so wish that they would have made all of those those robots men's voices, and then maybe we wouldn't have that problem.
Yep.
But maybe we would anyway. But yeah, I think it's really important that if you're one of your team members is not performing like they should, if they're making mistakes, if they're not coding as cleanly as they should be, whatever, you want to provide guidance and not just criticism. You want to make it actionable, something that they can actually do, and not just, your code sucks, because that is completely not actionable.
Mhm.
Something like, your routines are longer than what the company suggests, as per our coding standards. So it would be really much better if you could break them into smaller routines that are more easily testable, or your unit tests seem to be only getting 50% code coverage. You really should be getting a higher percent. And you always want to highlight the good too, in addition to saying, what they're doing wrong. So not just what could be improved, but also what they're doing well.
Yeah.
As this especially is true for reviews. So if you're doing a formal review of some kind, so often it's like, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, or whatever. And it's really important to highlight also all of the really good things that they've done. It was really great of you to do a lunch talk on this topic, and you've really got good speaking skills, and your comments in this code were nice because they weren't just reiterating what was done, but were explaining why. And I think that's really important for the long-term maintenance of the project, or, whatever, to be really highlighting that. I was talking to my daughter, who is a a cancer researcher and is developing better tests for cancers, and talking to her about her experience, because she is just slowly starting to make the step. She just had her second person who's now been hired underneath her that she's responsible for,
Good for
or
her.
on her team. She said that one of the things that they have been trying in her company is something that they call start, stop, continue, where the idea is when you're doing a review, you listen to you list the things that they should be starting to do. So now that you've been here a year, you might want to start also contributing to this project, or you might want to get more involved also in back-end development, or what things that they would suggest to continue to move your career forward. Things you should stop, like we don't need for you to be writing 6 paragraphs with every one of your GitHub check-ins. Just get to the point, and so stop doing that. But continue to put comments with, so it stop, start, continue. So it always, has, the path forward, which is the start, what they can stop doing, either because, they've been there long enough, now someone else is taking care of that, or it's something that isn't meeting with the team's goals, and then things that they are doing well that they should continue to do. And I think that that's a really good kind of simple way to be thinking about how to provide this guidance without just criticizing.
Exactly. Yeah. I've worked at a lot of places where the code review process was basically be as big of a jerk as possible, and
Yeah.
I never learned anything. And I mean, I also felt afraid to ask questions, and that's just not the team dynamic that you want. You want people to be open, non-judgmental of other people's code, stuff like that. It's a lot of times it's hard to conform to standards, because I mean, every single job I've ever had has different standards, a different way to, space out the code. Some places are adamant that you have to have everything tabbed in a nice, flow. And yeah, it's hard to conform without guidance, like you said.
Yeah, and a lot of the code reviews that I was in back in the day, people, they would have 8 people come in, and 0 of them looked at the code ahead of time. So everybody's just kind of flipping through the code, and, oh, you missed a semicolon here. Oh, this variable name should be longer, or, and nothing was really, they didn't talk about the design. They didn't talk about the architecture. They didn't talk about whether what you wrote really met the need of what was required, because nobody came prepared. So all they did was nitpick the things that they could see at a glance, because nobody could comment on anything deeper than that, because nobody had spent the time. So at least now with the GitHub code reviews, frequently, since can kind of more do it on your own time, and you're not just all pulled in, oh gosh, I've got this meeting now, you can kind of take a little bit more time and really think about, does this change make sense, as opposed to just, are the semicolons in the right place, and the tabs, and the, whatever else.
Exactly.
One of the other problems, or one of the other things that I did wrong, and I know a lot of new people starting to manage do wrong, and my daughter struggles with this one also, is that you don't want to solve every problem. Developers themselves are inherently problem solvers, and that means us too, those managers who came from the development path. So it's very tempting to want to solve their problems for them, and that's sometimes like the worst thing that you can do. Because if every time someone comes in with a problem, well, I'll just code that for you and get it to you. I mean, that's not helping them. It's not helping you. But so often that's easier, because it's easier to sit down, go away. I'm going to just sit and code, and I'll get it how I want it. as opposed to explaining enough to them to be able to do that. So you really want to help, you want to guide, you want to answer questions, but you can't be the one solving all their problem.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it comes to just that we, as technical specialists, if we know how to do something and somebody's struggling with it and it's urgent, honestly, then it's really hard to not do that. But you need to teach people instead of doing it for them. And that means guiding them to the answer instead. And then it'll help them to remember like why and how. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the other problems, again, for people, you mentioned you're a perfectionist. I kind of really swing that way also. And as a perfectionist, one of the things that's also difficult with not solving the problem for them is letting them do it their way when it could be different from your way. A little example is I'm not a huge fan of doing laundry. I don't know very many people that are, but I am relatively particular about how things are folded and how, whatever. And I found very early on, I've been married a long time, I found very early on that if I refold everything that my significant other folds, that he will stop coming to help fold the laundry. So I just had to let that go. And so my shirt is folded with some wrinkles. It's better than doing it all by myself. So it's kind of a decision you have to make. Are you going to want to do the laundry by yourself for the rest of your life? Or are you going to accept having your t-shirt have some wrinkles in it because your spouse doesn't quite lay it out exactly how you do and it looks a little more crumpled? That's it, and it's the same thing in business. I actually worked on a doc team a while back where the guy in charge actually physically rewrote absolutely every single thing that every team member did because he wanted it in one voice and he wanted it with one set of terms. And instead of helping any of us, kind of learn that voice, I mean, we're intelligent people, we're software developers, we could learn a voice. And instead of providing guidance, he just would do that. And not only did it then eat up all of his time, so he was working like 80 hours a week because he was rewriting everybody's work, but it also led to a huge amount of turnover because this was a volunteer thing. So who wants to volunteer to help work on this documentation when you would spend 3 days getting the wording of this particular topic exactly right, really clear, made sure every example flowed through and that all the code worked, only to have it completely unrecognizable when he was done. So, pretty much people would stay for 3-4 weeks and then would be gone. And then a couple more people, oh, I'm so excited to work on this. And then, how excited is it when it's just completely being redone? So that's kind of on the far end of that example, but you do need to it's really hard with code. And I'm sure you've worked with people like that too, where they want all the code to look exactly the same. And sometimes you really need to ask, does it really need to be? I mean, to some extent, you want consistency because somebody else has to be able to maintain it. But if one person puts in 3 spaces and one person puts in a tab, is that going to make it impossible for you to read? Back again, in my days when I was first starting, whenever I got a piece of code to update, the first thing I did was reformat it and re-subroutine it. And you don't actually have to do that. And that is really difficult to break a habit from.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've worked for places that were really lax on code reviews and there was no consistency. And then I've worked at places that were just too, if I if I misspelled a word in a comment, are you really going to send that back to me? If that was the only issue that you found, I think that's a waste of both of our time. Like, it's a comment, it's not the actual code. Or I had this one job early on in my career when I was, really desperate to find jobs, where I wrote SQL stored procedures.
Mhm.
So this new manager came in and he made everyone encapsulate every table and name of everything in brackets, which is optional. And he was adamant that that improved speed. And I don't think it does, honestly. It's just a style choice. So I spent hours and hours just mindlessly going through like hundreds of SQL stored procedures and adding the brackets around everything. Well, at least I got paid for it,
Yeah.
Yeah. So in your career, your long, very long career, have you noticed any struggles as a woman? Have people treated you differently?
In terms of actual management and the teams I've worked on, I haven't really had very many problems. And I think part of it was when I was starting in my career, there were so many women, it wasn't like it was. I ran into a lot more problems when I started to speak at conferences.
Mm.
The first conference, or the first, the first time I actually spoke at a formal conference, walking into the speaker room, and of course it's 12 guys sitting there,
And you,
and
yep.
you're kind of taken aback for a moment, like, do I even belong in here? The nice thing was that since I got a degree in physics, since my freshman year of college, I was in classes with all guys, so it wasn't a completely unfamiliar experience. Very luckily for me, one of the guys that were in there came up and introduced himself, and I still thank him forever for making me feel comfortable. The thing, though, that continued for that particular conference, it was one of those kind that they have in different cities, and so we had like 3 or 4 of them a year, and at almost every single one for the first 5 years or so, it would get to be dinner time, and they would stand up and say, well, we're going to go to dinner. See ya. And they would all go to dinner
Without you.
A group of them, not all 12 people, but 4 or 5, whoever have been sitting in there by the end of the day, and leave me sit there. Mm-hmm. And that continued for the longest time. And it got to the point where I stopped, usually I would go to the conference and actually go to the conference for the 3 days or whatever, and go to the talks. And I just stopped doing that because I was tired of being by myself and, not having anything to do in the evenings other than sit in my room. And so unless I could turn it into a vacation and bring one of my kids or my husband or my sister or something, I just started flying in to do my talk and then heading out. The interesting thing is, though, more recently, there have been a newer generation of speakers coming in. And the first time they're like, hey, we're all going over to such and such to eat, and want to come? I was just about, it's like, are you really talking to me? But that whole younger generation seems to be much more comfortable with inviting me along. And it was wonderful. And then, of course, the Angular conferences are completely different because, vast majority, or not majority, but a huge percentage of the speakers are women. And there's a tremendous amount of women at the conference. And it's all a family, and everybody's, kind. And it's a whole different kind of experience. But that was kind of one of the hardest things for me, especially at the beginning, was just feeling so very alone when I'd go to these conferences, because back then, way back before 2 years ago, you had to actually go to a conference.
I know. I'm not sure if I prefer it that way or the way it is now, because now I can go to all of them, like I can go to any conference I want. But if you're traveling and speaking, especially, that takes a lot more time out of your schedule. And also, the conferences I speak at now are all pre-recorded. So it's the same thing that we do with our Pluralsight stuff. Like it's, the whole process over
I just
again.
spoke in Athens this morning.
Nice.
Yeah.
And now you're home.
And now I'm home. So yeah, it's that part is nice, but I really, really miss the people. I miss talking to people. I miss going and seeing, people that are new to Angular, the other speakers. I miss seeing them, and it's just not the same.
Exactly.
Online.
Yeah. So with speaking and managing as a woman, I actually haven't had poor experiences with that. But when I was a dev, and when I was a lead dev, and then when I was an MVP, it seemed to anger people, that I was good at my job, and that I was not only good at my job, but because of my perfectionistic attitude and knowing that as a woman, I have to work harder, I would raise the bar. And a lot of guys don't like that. They don't like seeing new approaches to stuff, especially if you're the only woman on the team. I have been that so many times. I can't even. Yeah. Yeah. So what advice would you have for the next generation of devs, managers, and speakers?
Well, just in general, I think that sometimes it's really nice to think of yourself as a person in tech, and to not think of yourself as necessarily a woman in tech. And I think that sometimes helps a little bit in terms of not necessarily feeling so different, because if you think of yourself as just a woman in tech, then you're kind of separating yourself from the other people that aren't women in tech. So I think that helps. And I know that's sort of a weird answer, but that's kind of what got me through being a physics major. I didn't really think of myself as the woman in the class. I was just another person in the class with everyone else. I think the other thing would be, not to be afraid of asking questions. I know sometimes, again, when you feel different, and this is true for both women and people of color, or if you're in any way different than what you feel like the norm is around you, or the people around you, the feeling is that you shouldn't be asking questions. And I think that's one of the worst things that you can do for your career and for your job, because tech really is all about learning. You have to be constantly learning as to, is this the best way to be doing this? Well, what about the latest version of this? Or, what about this new technique, or this new add-in, or, whatever. So you have to be asking questions. Sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out who to ask questions of. They used to have little study groups in physics, and my first couple of years, pretty much my sophomore and junior year, I was like too intimidated to join any of those. And I felt like I was really at a disadvantage. And finally, my senior year, I'm just like, well, screw that. And, I just asked to join a study group. And it was really nice to have people to, help solve some of these problems with, because sometimes the homework assignments were, intense. And so, having someone to be asking questions back and forth with, because sometimes, when you explain it to the other person too, you're learning better. And we know this as Pluralsight authors. Frequently, in order to explain something well, you have to learn it so much better in order to explain it to someone. So it works both ways. They're getting the benefit of what you know, you're getting the benefit of what they know. But it's really hard because sometimes it's really easy to feel intimidated. And the other thing that I want to suggest, and this is very specific, but it has suited me well, and that is to call out things. I just saw someone on Twitter, and it made me so sad that some guy in her office continued, when nobody was looking, to go up and put his hand on her and whisper stuff in her ear. And all I wanted to say to that woman is just say, what the hell? If every time he did that, you said something like that loud enough for maybe someone in the next office to hear, they would stop doing it. Now, they should not be doing it. It's completely inappropriate. But I think, again, too often we are intimidated. And I think that we need to stop feeling intimidated. And that's so much easier to say than it is to do.
Absolutely true.
But do everything that you can to just make it clear that that is not acceptable. Like, what are you doing?
Exactly.
It
It's
doesn't
creepy.
have to be, you don't have to be swearing or anything, but just loudly and firmly, what are you doing? And look them in the face and see what their answer is.
Exactly. Yeah, I've needed to hear that for a long time. I think as women, a lot of the times we're raised to be polite.
Yes.
And men expect us to agree with them all the time. I really hate that. But I've had a lot of creeps in offices touching me and stuff. And I thought that would stop when I was like older, but the last time it happened, I was like 38, I think. So I don't know if it'll ever stop, but that is a reason that I work from home.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And, I don't know if it would work in every case, but, just sometimes just the surprise of an immediate, what are you doing kind of thing might take them aback enough for them to stop doing it. And, again, there's always some that go way past that, and something as simple as that won't work, but that might take care of some of it. Just say it.
Yeah, exactly. And don't be afraid. I think a lot of us are afraid to speak up because we think that we might be blamed, like I'm touching you because you acted like you wanted me to touch you, blaming the woman for inappropriate behavior is misogyny 101, and that has to stop. But I think jobs won't hopefully fire you if you call out harassment, and if they do, you didn't want to work there anyway, right?
Yeah. And sometimes you don't even have to, it doesn't have to go as far as being reported necessarily, if the mere sense of letting them know that you totally think that that's completely unacceptable,
right,
might stop it. Again, it's not going to be every case. Nothing is that simple, but it might help somewhat, just, if nothing else, to make it clear. And, depending upon where it is and how loud you are, that other people are going to potentially hear it too. And that starts to create a little embarrassment on their part, and they might be less apt to do something like that again.
Exactly. I could talk to you about these topics all day, but unfortunately we have to wrap up because I am cognizant that you are very busy and I don't want to keep you longer than promised. So to wrap up, why don't you tell us where can people find you and what projects or talks you have upcoming?
I am on Twitter at Deborah Kurata. So that's a really good place to reach out if you'd like to talk about anything. I also have my courses on Pluralsight. So you can just look up my name, Deborah Kurata, on Pluralsight, and it will give you the list of all of my courses that I have there. Again, it's primarily C# and lots of Angular courses. ArcGIS, and we've been doing what they're calling Angular World Tour, which is several of us speaking all over the world from our desks. And again, as I mentioned this morning, we were in Athens, but if you look up Angular World Tour, you can see where we're all going next. I'm not speaking at every one of them, but it was kind of nice. Today's talk, it was all 3 women. They also have 3 speakers, and so it was nice to have all 3 of us there. But as I said, every one of them is sponsored in a different city somewhere on the globe, and it has 3 speakers. And I've been doing like every other month or so of those, and it's been real fun. So that would be something else to try if you haven't tried it.
That's great. Yeah, that's a lot on your schedule. I can't wait to hear these talks and just watch so many more of your courses. I've only watched 2, I think, and you have, dozens, right? I think. Yeah.
Yep.
So thank you so much for agreeing to be here. This was recorded before we even published our first episode. So, you didn't even have a frame of reference as to what this was. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Today's episode is sponsored by Pluralsight. Pluralsight is the premier learning platform for technology skills. With a Pluralsight subscription, you can have access to thousands of courses created by industry experts, including myself, covering topics from programming languages to soft skills, including leadership and management. Visit tiarasandtech.com/Pluralsight to get started with a free 10-day trial today. If you want to support us, please like, subscribe, and share this episode with your fellow gems. Let me know in the comments what other topics you would like me to cover. Thanks for watching or listening, and have a great day.